Natural science is a way of investigating the natural world being the elements of physics or chemistry or biology that we can observe through experimentation. Evolution is simply understanding how different traits are inherited over generations within a population. Evolutionary biology is just basically the study of that in biological organisms, and it encompasses a wide range of different ways of investigating that question. The early 1920s was the beginning of a period that we refer to now in retrospect as the modern synthesis. It was a period of time where different biologists and people who are studying genetics were coming together to try to sort out how to mathematically understand how biology works. Any sort of teaching of evolution that said something about humans having been evolved from lesser life forms in the parlance of the law basically was verboten. In response to that law getting passed, there was basically a test case brought up, and that's the Scopes trial. So John Scopes was convinced by a bunch of different entities to teach evolution in the classroom to try to get this law struck, because the parties that were involved with challenging the law thought that the law was overreaching. And so Scopes was made the test case. They wanted to bring an individual in who was willing to be under the scrutiny. Scopes wasn't even a regular biology teacher. He was relatively new, so he didn't normally teach evolution. And I will also point out in the textbook that he was teaching, evolution was a very small piece of that textbook. Publishers were afraid of the potential liability of putting evolution in their textbooks, even though there was no law that said they couldn't. The net result, though, was that we have a whole generation of people who were taught biology without necessarily being taught about evolution. And so the complaint was designed so that it would be, from the point of view of the litigators, it was going to be a fairly straightforward case. They didn't want to complicate it. They wanted to make it about the law. They didn't want to make it about Scopes. But it was quickly accelerated into being a national spectacle because of the people who were brought in. Brian was brought in and Darrow was brought in, and basically the two of them turned it into kind of a show trial. It was broadcast as the trial of the century, but it was basically fundamentally about this question of, was it legal to restrict the teaching of evolution in the classroom, but even more particularly, the teaching of evolution when it came to humans in the classroom? The letter of the law was about teaching about human evolution. It wasn't really necessarily about teaching evolution as a concept. If you go back and look at how the trial unfolded, Darrow was trying to bring in expert witnesses and individuals who would try the law. And the judge ultimately saw that that was happening and didn't allow it, because the judge said, nope, this is about John Scopes and a misdemeanor. This is not about the constitutionality of this particular law, even though ultimately that was what got challenged. Ultimately, what came out of that was a kind of subverted opinion. They upheld the law, but they basically said, well, if you really look at the law, what it says is that you can't teach that humans were created specially. Like, you can't teach against that. It didn't say you couldn't teach evolution. Especially, you could teach evolution if you wanted to, of any organism, and you could just avoid talking about humans. So how does it affect evolutionary biology and people like me who teach evolutionary biology? It does create these kind of social or cultural fights that start to escalate in various forms over the course of the latter 20th century to today. And the reason why we have those struggles is in part because of this concern that evolutionary theory erodes morals and it erodes people's beliefs. And the truth is that there's nothing in science that says anything about religion. One thing to think about with evolutionary theory is that just like any other concept, it's a tool. So you can use it or you can choose to not use it. So teaching about evolutionary theory gives us a tool by which to understand how different organisms appear and how organisms have changed over time. It's just going to be a mechanism by which we can understand the world. And if you don't understand the world through that tool, there are other ways to understand the world. But if you don't want to use that as your tool, that's absolutely your right.